Welcome back to Robots vs. Vampires. I'm Adrian Smith, your guide through the fantastical and unbelievable.
And I'm Julia Jones, here to help break down those sci-fi concepts, even when they involve vampires.
Right. Today's deep dive takes us into a world, well, a world you already know, actually.
Oh, right from the story we got.
Yeah, exactly. It's a world where some teenage vampires make this pact for power, but quickly learn that, well, the consequences might be a little more than they bargained for.
Oh, yeah.
Now, these aren't your typical angsty teens, though.
No.
We're talking about Kai, who can shift through shadows.
Wow.
Maya, who can weave illusions, Ben with telekinetic powers, and Zoe, whose sense of hearing is so sharp she can practically read minds.
It's interesting, though, how even in a world of vampires, these teens are still kind of like outcasts, right?
Yeah.
Their powers set them apart, even among their own kind. It really makes you think about the pressures that teens face in any world.
Yeah, even a supernatural one.
Definitely. And they find a way to stand out, too, don't they?
Oh, they do. With this ancient grimoire, they form the Crimson Pact. A blood oath that links all their powers together and amplifies them.
Right.
I have to ask, from your perspective, what does a ritual like that, a blood oath, what does that tell us about these characters? What kind of commitment are they making?
Well, blood oaths are often used in fantasy to represent a serious, unbreakable bond, It signifies that they're willing to sacrifice something
Right.
to put the group above the individual. In a way, it's like the ultimate commitment to their friendship and their desire for power.
Yeah.
But as the story unfolds, it becomes clear that this kind of pact can also be a trap.
Oh.
It binds you to things you don't understand and forces you to confront the darker aspects of yourself.
And they definitely confront those. Initially, their powers seem like a dream come true.
Yeah.
Right? Zoe can fine-tune her hearing. Maya's illusions become hyper-realistic. And Kai, he just blends into the shadows, leaving just a whisper and the faint scent of ozone in his wake. And Ben? Let's talk about Ben. He discovers that he can move things with his mind. I can only imagine the fun they had at first.
It's like a classic superhero origin story, right?
Yeah.
They're discovering their powers, testing their limits, maybe even playing a few pranks.
Yeah.
There's this sense of freedom and possibility, but as we see with Ben, who ends up disappearing into those tunnels beneath the manor,
Right.
there's a very real danger to this kind of power, especially when it's amplified by something as ancient and unpredictable as this Crimson Pact.
What stands out to you about the way their powers start to spiral? What are some of the red flags that the story highlights?
Well, there are a few things. First, the pack seems to amplify not just their abilities, but also their insecurities and fears. Zoe's senses become overwhelming. Maya's illusions turn dark and disturbing, and Kai seems to be losing himself in the shadows.
Right.
It's like the pact is feeding on their vulnerabilities and twisting their desires into something monstrous.
And then there's the growing distrust among the group.
Right.
They went into this pact wanting to be stronger together, but the power seems to be driving them apart.
Exactly. The pact becomes this source of suspicion and paranoia.
Yeah.
They start to question each other's motives, wondering who might be losing control, who might become a danger to the others. This breakdown of trust is a classic theme in stories about power.
Sure.
It shows how easily power can corrupt even the strongest bonds.
It's almost as if the Crimson Pact is a character in itself.
Yeah.
This entity with its own agenda.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
The pact isn't just a magical tool. It's a force that has a will of its own. It sets the terms, demands sacrifices.
Wow.
And ultimately, it's the pact that will determine the fate of these teenagers.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Totally.
It's scary, and that's where this story takes on another layer, because it's not just about the external threats these teens face, it's the internal ones, too.
Yeah.
They form this pact for acceptance, but now they're dealing with isolation and fear, not just from the outside world, but from each other.
You can really see how their powers become a reflection of their inner struggles.
Oh, definitely.
Zoe, who can hear everything right.
Right.
She's bombarded by secrets and whispers,
Yeah.
making her question everyone around her.
Yeah.
It makes you think about the weight of knowledge,
Yeah.
how sometimes hearing too much can be a burden.
Absolutely. And then you have Maya, whose illusions once playful and whimsical take on this dark edge, mirroring the growing paranoia within the group. It's as if the pact is twisting their abilities, turning their strengths into weaknesses.
And we can't forget about Kai. He's literally fading into the shadows, becoming more isolated. His words are cryptic and unsettling. Is he succumbing to the Pact's influence, or is there something more to his transformation?
That's a great question. It makes you wonder if he sees something the others don't. if he understands the true nature of the Pact in a way they can't yet grasp. Or maybe, as you said, he's simply losing himself to the shadows,
Right.
becoming a symbol of the darkness they're all fighting.
And then there's Ben. His experience in the tunnels left him shaken. His telekinesis, a constant reminder of the Pact's power and the danger it represents. You mentioned superhero origin stories earlier, but there's also a clear connection here to classic horror tropes.
Yeah.
The fear of losing control, of becoming a monster. That's a theme that resonates across genres.
It certainly does. And it speaks to our fascination with the unknown.
Yeah.
With the potential for both good and evil that exists within us all. These teens, they're essentially playing with fire. And the story doesn't shy away from the potential consequences of that.
They went into this looking for strength and unity.
Right.
But they've ended up fractured and afraid of their own potential. What do you think this story is trying to say about the nature of power? Especially for those who feel powerless to begin with.
It's a cautionary tale, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It highlights the seductive nature of power, how it can promise solutions to your problems, but ultimately come with a price.
Right.
It also emphasizes the importance of control, of understanding the limits of your abilities, and the potential consequences of pushing those limits.
And the fact that they're teenagers makes it even more poignant.
Oh, absolutely.
Teenagers are already grappling with issues of identity, belonging, and power dynamics in their everyday lives.
Yeah.
Adding supernatural abilities into the mix just amplifies those struggles.
Exactly. These teens are trying to find their place in the world. And the Pact, in a way, represents a shortcut to that. But as we're seeing, shortcuts rarely lead to the desired destination.
Right.
They often come with unforeseen consequences, forcing you to confront challenges you might not be prepared for.
This reminds me of that line from the story where Zoe traces the fading sigil of the Pact on her wrist.
Oh, yeah.
And says, maybe this was a terrible idea. It's a moment of realization, of understanding that they might have bitten off more than they can chew.
And it's interesting that Kai from within the shadows replies, best terrible idea ever.
Wow.
It shows how even as they start to question the Pact, there's still a part of them that clings to the power it offers.
Right.
It highlights the inner conflict they're facing, the struggle between their desire for control and the realization that they might be losing it.
It's that push and pull that makes this story so compelling. On one hand, they're terrified of the Pact and the changes it's brought about. But on the other hand, there's that undeniable allure of power.
Yeah.
Especially when it makes you feel less like an outcast.
And that's the heart of the story, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about more than just vampires and magic. It's a reflection of the human experience, the universal desire for acceptance and belonging. These teens, they just want to fit in, to be seen and understood. The Pact, for all its dangers, offered them a taste of that.
But the cost of that acceptance might be too high. The Pact has not only changed their powers, it's changed them. Zoe is consumed by the weight of secrets. Maya's creativity has become twisted. Kai is fading into darkness both literally and figuratively. And Ben is haunted by his loss of control.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, what would you do in their position? Would you be willing to risk so much for a chance to belong?
It's a question we all face in different ways, isn't it? We all make choices, some desperate ones, in the pursuit of acceptance, recognition, or even just a sense of purpose. This story reminds us that those choices, especially when they involve forces beyond our understanding, can have profound consequences.
And it's not just about the individual choices either. The story highlights the impact of fear and prejudice on those who are different.
Right.
These teens are outcasts not just because of their powers, but because society fears and rejects what it doesn't understand.
Precisely. And that fear, that rejection, can drive people to extremes. It can make them vulnerable to dangerous influences like the Crimson Pact that promise solutions but ultimately lead to further isolation and pain. This story is a powerful reminder that true acceptance comes not from conforming to societal expectations or seeking power over others, but from embracing who you are, flaws and all.
So where do we leave these teens? Hanging in the balance, right?
Yeah.
They're facing a choice. Do they succumb to the darkness that seems to be entwined with the Pact, or do they find a way to break free and forge their own path?
The story leaves that question open, which is part of its buoyance. Yeah.
It challenges us to think about the choices we would make, the compromises we would be willing to accept, and the kind of power we would wield if given the chance.
And I think that's a great place for us to wrap up this episode of Robots vs. Vampires. You've given us a lot to think about, a lot to unpack. This story, while fantastical on the surface, speaks to very real human experiences, the desire for belonging, dangers of unchecked power, and the consequences of choices made out of fear or desperation.
It's a reminder that even in a world of vampires and magic, it's our humanity, our choices, and our connections with each other that ultimately define who we are.
Until next time, keep those imaginations firing, and remember the line between fact and fiction is always a bit blurry.